We're going to continue working on this 79cc Predator small engine. This is the reassembly process, so continue watching to see what we're doing in this one. Okay, so this next part is going to be installing the ignition coil, and this takes the two longest bolts in, I believe, the whole engine. So we're going to go ahead and use those two bolts. They thread into this spot right here, so these two bolts kind of close together. I've got the magnet of the engine pointed straight down for this part. And there is adjustment that goes with these as well. Okay, now before I tighten these up, I'm going to take the coil and move it as far away from the flywheel as I can. Now I'm just going to take and snug these bolts up. They're not tight, but they're snug. That should hold the coil in place. As I've got those snugged up, I'm going to roll the engine over. Maybe. Why did it just lock up? Oh. If you're not careful with this governor assembly, it does get in the way of the crankshaft and connecting rod, so do that. As this comes around, there is a magnet right here. The spinning of the magnet past this coil is what gives the engine spark. So the gap between the ignition coil and the magnet is critical to engine operation. And with those as loose as they were, as I ran it past there, it actually pulled the coil into place. So in your feeler gauges, a lot of the times you will have one brass feeler gauge. It is 10/1000ths of an inch, which just happens to be the exact amount of space you want between a small engine coil and the magnet on its flywheel. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and kind of put that in that place. I loosen the bolts a little bit. It sucks the coil right down tight. So I'm going to have to actually pull up on the other one, or the easiest way to do this is grab a second feeler gauge, lift it up, put it in there, snug these down a little bit. Okay. But we don't really care so much about the gap between the iron part of the flywheel. We really care about the magnet part. So we're going to rotate that, and see, now it's hitting. So it's too close there. So this one is good. And that one's a little bit tight. So what I'll do is I'll take my brass feeler gauge, and it actually fits really good on this side. So this is 10/1000ths over here. Loosen our coil up just a touch. Put the brass feeler gauge in. If you had a long brass feeler gauge, this would probably be easier as well. Pull that out. Pull this one over here, check it again. Probably a touch under 10/1000ths, but that is good enough for me. So we've now got 10/1000ths on each side of this coil. Snug it down a touch better. Let's rotate the magnet out of the way. Okay, so So those are now nice and tight, and this engine is now capable of creating spark. Okay, so our coil is adjusted, our flywheel's on, this thing is really coming together and almost ready to run. We already have this piece of heat shielding on the engine. The next piece that we need is shaped like this. We'll go right into here. Maybe. Okay, so it sets down into the engine just like so. We've got our heat shield here, our heat shield there. We will now take our fan cover, and this ignition on-off switch here connects onto the coil. So it plugs in right there. Not quite sure how that comes out of here yet, but we'll figure it out in a minute. Probably just like that. Maybe it went through there. I'm not really sure. This seems like it's going to work, so I'm going to go ahead and leave it. Now I'll go ahead and start putting my bolts that hold this fan shroud down in. On this one back here, I'm going to put the ground side of the ignition on-off switch. Okay, so there's something to watch for. When you're putting this together, make sure that the governor stays on this side of it. I'm going to pop this all back apart, flip it to the other side, and then go again. Okay, so now we got the governor arm on the right side, tightening these things up. Well, that one's stripped, so that's cool. Next time this engine gets taken apart, we'll fix that stripped out fastener, but for right now, we're just going to call it a day. Okay, so now we've got our shroud on. Our engine still spins over nice and free. Feels like it might actually build compression. On-off switch is there. This wire routing is probably not real great, but it'll work. Now we can take our recoil. Okay, so now the engine is all, the recoil is on. Okay, it should, everything's lined up, valves are set, should be good. Oh yeah, gotta hold that over. That's it for this one. Up next we'll put on the carburetor, the linkage, which I'm going to do the best I can with that, but if you've got any other options you might want to follow them, and then the exhaust, and that'll be it. Then the last one, we'll start it.